Hello, Warren, and welcome to the third part of the Mastermind series. And today we talked about reframing. And as usual, what does reframing mean, Warren?
Thank you, Nella. Always good to be here. So reframing, it's such an important step because it's got to do with our perspective on life. And we don't often use that to its full potential. So we allow life to happen to us instead of focusing on, but what is my response to it? So, and that's really what the reframing is. It's to look at your perspective, your understanding of what is going on. And anybody who has ever been in any relationship of any kind will understand that there are always three sides to the story. It's your side, my side, and then there's the truth. And I will argue my side, you will argue your side. We're seeing the same thing from different perspectives. So we will often say you have a mental framework. So what is your mental framework? Well, that's how you perceive things. It's not necessarily wrong, it's different. And it's then to understand, but maybe the way that I see things needs to change. Not the actual things that need to change, but how I perceive them. And that's what reframing is really about.
That is so interesting because that should explain a lot of what psychologists always question, how people who grow up in the same household end up turning out very differently. Same values, same upbringing, but they end up being very different people. And I guess maybe it's part of the framing, but perhaps I should just ask the question as is, Warren. Why do you think people who face the same situation respond to it very differently?
So the big argument is always nature versus nurture. So do you end up being the person that you are because genetically that's your makeup, or because of your environment that shapes and molds you? So the argument will continue forever, and I think it's a combination of both, but I think there's a missing ingredient, and that's probably the most important one. So it's the choice component, which is the most powerful thing that God has given to us. So powerful that God himself cannot override it. So why we spend time trying to make other people's choices and trying to wish that they would choose differently, and we moan about it, whatever, like not even God can change your choice. So that's the one aspect. The other aspect is that is the power that you have. So you have to be very conscious of the choices that you make. So when something happens to you, or if you are genetically predisposed towards something, like let's just say, maybe it's easier for you to fall into that trap. That's still not an excuse, because within that you have choice. And when you can see that the choices that you make are the biggest factor, that's the biggest determining factor to the outcome. How you want to see things is a choice, irrespective of what you think is happening to you. And that's important.
That is very, very interesting. This is very good. Thank you very much for that, Warren. But looking at the reframing part, obviously that is an intention. You have to be very intentional about the reframing because you need to understand what your mindset is to get to where you need to go. And often these affect our stories, our life stories, as well as our relationships, right? So how can we reframe in order to be able to be intentional about our stories and our relationships?
So if I ask this question, and I know you're the one that's supposed to ask the questions, but
Go ahead.
Let me ask you a question. So if we look at how many times God has taken a bad situation and turned it out for good, how many times does he have to do that before we realize it's not the situation that needs to change, it's our perception of it, it's our perspective of it. So instead of us focusing on the circumstances, on the details of what has happened, let's ask another question. Let's ask, but what didn't happen? Or even better, let's ask, but how is God going to use this? So often, if you're faced with a situation, we tend to blow it out of proportion. We will look at it and say like, oh, this is so terrible. You're not even going to remember in 5 years. But at that moment in your life, it shapes everything. It shapes your mood, shapes your conversations, it shapes your interaction with everybody, and it creates so much chaos. It's actually a really small thing, but because of your framework that is maybe wrong, and you're looking at it from the wrong perspective, now it's massive. So if we reframe that and we say, but hang on, God uses these things all the time, and I can be thankful that it's not actually that bad. So I'm not saying minimize it, but I'm saying just look at it in a much bigger perspective. And then the second part of it is to pre-frame. So first, you really just want to thank God that it's not as big as what you might think it is, by increasing your perspective. And the second part, you pre-frame. So what you do is you say, I know that bad things are going to happen. I know that. Why? Because we're living in a bad world, and it's a broken world. And I don't make perfect choices, and nobody around me makes perfect choices. So bad things are going to happen. But I get to choose. How am I going to see those things? Am I going to see them as opportunities for God to work at maybe a deeper level than when things are just going fine? Because then I start rejoicing in my tribulations, which is what Paul says. He says, I boast in my weaknesses. That's a different frame. So you can see, I choose the frame. I'm going to choose to look at life and see, how is God going to use this? And then finally, it is to really find God's goodness in it. So every single day, the hummingbird and the crow, they wake up hungry. And then they want to go and eat. So the crow goes and looks for frot meat, like dead animals. That's what he's looking for. And he finds it. So you see them on the road, and there it is picking, and it's terrible. The hummingbird wakes up every day, and what does the hummingbird look for? It looks for nectar, for sweet nectar, and it finds it. So when you wake up in the morning, the question is, what are you looking for? Because whatever you're looking for, you're going to find it. So if you're a crow, you're going to find food, because they eat every day. If you're a hummingbird, you're going to find food. I'm asking, so what do you want to find? What is your perspective? What frame do you want to choose? That God is good, that He is great, that He is in control, that things will work out for the good, that He will make sure, because that's the truth. But often that's not how we look at it. We focus so much on our circumstances and how bad things are and how terrible and whatever, and then that's more than likely what you're going to find. So let's rather choose the frame that glorifies God and that aligns with God's truth, that God is at work, and His work will never ever fail.